A very good morning to all of you and welcome to Pediatric Liver CME Medical Surgical Fusion. This is the first time that we are having a fusion of the surgeons and the pediatricians in the liver disorders in children, and we hope you have a fruitful and enjoyable journey throughout the day. We are going to start our session with approach to neonatal cholestasis, and our panelists are Dr. Alka Jadhav. She is Professor of Pediatrics, Sion Hospital. She is in charge of the Pediatric Gastroenterology and Hepatobiliary Clinic. She's done endoscopic training in LM Jyoti Hospital. She is a member of the Executive Committee of the Indian Society of Pediatric Gastroenterology, Hepatology and Nutrition. She is IIT Coordinator for ORS Awareness Drive in Mumbai, and she is Executive Committee of Atulya Foundation. Our second panelist is Dr. Rajiv Redkar. He is a consultant pediatric surgeon at Lilavati Hospital, Shushrusha Citizens Cooperative Hospital, and Bhai Wadia Hospital for Children. He is also the medical director of Shushrusha Hospital. He's got immense experience in pediatric liver surgery. He's worked as a clinical lecturer in pediatric hepatobiliary surgery from 1996 and 1998 at King's College London, and he has over 30 publications. Dr. Sudha Sane, everyone is aware about her work in the field of pathology. She's an MD pathologist. She's consultant perinatal and pediatric pathologist. She's the ex-professor of pediatrics pathology, St. GS Medical College and KEM Hospital. She's founder member of SNEHA, Society for Natal Effects on Healthy Errors. And she's got more than 50 publications in recognized journals. She's also the author of a book called Surgical Pathology of Parasitic Disease. And she's done extremely good work in pediatric liver histopath interpretation. So we're going to start our first session. Can I have the slides, please? This is going to be an approach to neonatal cholestasis. And we are going to go through a journey of one child who's had neonatal cholestasis starting from birth. So this is a 7-year-old girl. She was noticed to have jaundice. Dr. Alka Jadhav, a 7-day girl comes with jaundice. When should one suspect neonatal cholestasis?
Actually, if you really go to see, jaundice is such a common presentation in newborns. Almost up to 50% of the newborns in first week of life develop jaundice in some form or the other. In the sense, it may be milder or it may be little more than mild, So probably a 7-day-old child, we have to take the detailed history as far as the antenatal, intranatal, postnatal history. We look at the child, whether the child is having, child is intrauterine growth retarded, does he look polycythemic, what are the blood groups of the mother, and then after the clinical examination, is the child well looking or the sick looking. So if all that thing is fine, in that case, and on examination the child is feeding well, his cryotone activity is good, he is otherwise doing well, I think what we do is probably we assess it. If the jaundice is icterus is till only the thighs and not over the legs, we reassure the parents and we really send them back only to come after 7 days, that is on day 15 of life, to see whether the jaundice has resolved or not. So probably it's a good detailed clinical history and examination to know whether it is a physiological jaundice or whether it is little more than a physiological persistence jaundice, history of prematurity, history of birth asphyxia, all that we take into account. And we reassure the patient. At this point of time, we just keep a note and we follow up the patient till day 15 of life. Is that right?
Yeah, that's true. On day 7, neonatal cholestasis is something that we don't really suspect. So we usually think that it is physiological jaundice. But a jaundice that is persisting more than 15 days of life, or jaundice that is associated with high colored urine or clay colored stools, is an alarming sign, and this is the time when we should run and rule out neonatal cholestasis. So this child, nothing was done, he was just advised sunlight exposure, and the parents went home. The parents did not turn up for 5 months, and suddenly they realized the jaundice has still persisted. So at 5 months of age, he came to us, and we found that he had jaundice with high colored urine. There were intermittent clay colored stools. This child, on further history, we found there was no other factor, there were no antenatal complications, mother had no fever, rash during pregnancy. This child was a full-term child. So, Dr. Alka Jadhav again, is this direct jaundice or is this indirect jaundice?
Actually, if we really go to the history and the clinical examination, verifies that the child has got high colored stool, this means there is definitely a direct component of jaundice. The indirect jaundice will not have such a high colored stool. Now going to the history, the age, the child,
There is high colored urine.
high colored urine, this means it is definitely a direct jaundice. So we really have to examine, definitely a
This
direct
is
jaundice.
on history when we suspect. So this is a child with high colored urine. So this is definitely neonatal cholestasis. They may have clay colored stools. Now, how would you differentiate between obstructive versus non-obstructive causes on history, Dr. Rajiv Rekar?
I mean, Dr. Jadhav has pointed out about the various aspects that one would highlight in the history. But as a surgeon, my advice is that instead of repeatedly investigating the child for finding out whether this is direct or not, one should assess the child as regards the stool color, and if there is any suspicion of it being pale or it being, clay colored as they classically call it, then it should ring a note in your mind that this could be a direct jaundice or it could be surgical jaundice. And the child should have a combination of jaundice, that is recurrence, with high stools, with a high colored urine and clay colored stools. So clay colored stools is an important constituent. And if that is so, then you clinically suspect that this child has got perhaps a direct jaundice.
Yeah.
The examination, the liver feel the enlargement of the liver, and sometimes at 5 months of age, they also get splenic enlargement and abdominal distension due to ascites. So in these counts on examination, you could, assert your clinical suspicions.
Right. So this child on history, the first thing that would tell us whether this is obstructive versus non-obstructive is the color of the stool. And this is one aspect where we as clinicians tend to overlook. We just ask the mother, is this stool yellow or clay? And the number of times that we've had mother saying this is yellow stool, but when we actually look at the color of the stool, it is clay colored. So the most important point on history would be clay colored stool. Though there are other features like usually a hepatitis would be a preterm or cholestasis would be a full term. Hepatitis would be low birth weight baby. There would be antenatal history of fever, rash, lymph nodes. But the most important thing is the color of the stool. It's clay colored versus yellow colored. And neonatal cholestasis usually are growing well. They look, healthy babies, whereas the ones with hepatitis are not growing that well. Dr. Alka Jadhav, why is it important?
Before that, actually, I just wanted to know about this, tell you about the clay colored stool. Sometimes it so happens that the stool's outer appearance is yellowish in color. So you really have to ask the mother that supposing while cleaning, accidentally if the stool is broken open or something, the outer part may be the yellowish tinge, but the inner part will definitely be clay color. What we call it as a cake test, the opening of the stool, whether is it really looking yellow, the inner part of, is it?
Yeah, so it's the most valid point, though it may be very yucky and very smelly to do that, but this is one thing that one needs to do to come to a conclusion and maybe save the patient's liver. So why is it important to differentiate between obstructive and non-obstructive jaundice, Dr. Alka Jadhav?
It's really, there's something called, what we call it as a hepatobiliary emergency. The diagnosis of biliary atresia is considered as hepatobiliary emergency. It is almost equivalent to a diagnosis of Kwashiorkor in a protein energy malnutrition child, or a diagnosis of diabetic ketoacidosis in a child with a diabetes. This is because if the timely action is not taken, so you have to have the right diagnosis at the right point of time and at the right moment. Because if the diagnosis is delayed, the treatment is denied, the child is deprived of the appropriate medical history. Because if you really don't take a proper action for the child up to 2 months of life, beyond that, the results and the successful outcome of the surgery are limited. Yeah. That's the reason why we have to treat it as emergency.
Yeah, so it's very important to diagnose obstructive jaundice, because if we miss that and we miss the golden period of the first 2 months of life, we are going to end up having this child going up to almost transplant. So neonatal cholestasis becomes an emergency. Among your medical emergencies of neonatal hepatitis are galactosemia, which again is very urgent diagnosis because it is reversible, and before irreversible liver damage sets in. So diagnosis is extremely important. Now this child on examination weighed 5.5 kgs. He had jaundice, he had hepatosplenomegaly, something that Dr. Redkar already pointed out about the spleen. He had ascites, he had umbilical hernia, and he had corneal xerosis. So these are the things that we found positive in this child. Now, Dr. Redkar, from this, can you tell us whether this is obstructive or non-obstructive?
Well, I think it's difficult to say from what you have said up till now whether this is obstructive or not. But this child, from what you are telling, is 5 months old.
Yes, he's fine.
And is having a probability of obstruction, which kind of evokes a, as you had said earlier, an emergency response within me, saying that whatever it is, if there is a suspicion of obstruction,
Right.
which it is on the history that you have told us, then something urgently has to be done. There
Right.
should be no wastage of time further on.
Yes.
And something urgent to identify whether there is obstruction or not.
Right, so we need to hurry up here, we need to really go fast. This child has already developed ascites, he's already getting a spleen, so there is a problem in this child now. Dr. Alka, can you tell us why does this child have a splenomegaly? Could there be any other cause apart from portal hypertension that this child has a spleen?
The child can get the spleen because of the neonatal hepatitis per se also. Portal hypertension is one of the effects of neonatal hepatitis which gives rise to the blood pressure changes. But because of the inflammation and the changes which occur in the immune system because of intrauterine infection, you will definitely get the splenomegaly. Splenomegaly may be due to the storage diseases which you are suspecting in case, if it is not neonatal cholestasis and some other cause. So you will definitely get the splenomegaly.
Yeah, so splenomegaly and neonatal cholestasis, if it's present right from the beginning, think of an intrauterine infection. If it's present later in life, it could be because of portal hypertension. In this patient, there is ascites, so definitely we think that there may be portal hypertension, so we need to run. Now, Dr. Redkar, you mentioned about we need to find out the cause by investigation as soon as possible. So how would you like to investigate this child?
Well, I mean, I will get on with the blood investigations, which are fairly run-of-the-mill. That is, you do the complete hemoglobin CBC count, you do the liver functions in its entirety, including the coagulation profile and the synthetic functions, that is, protein assessment, albumin assessments. Okay, and the other thing of note here is that instead of repeating blood investigations one after the other, my advice would be whatever you want to assess, including the viral markers or alpha-1 antitrypsin deficiency, all that should be done simultaneously. At King's, there is a policy that when a child comes with neonatal jaundice, there are about 20 bottles of blood that are collected. Some are banked, some are sent for examinations at once. And at times they give blood transfusion after collecting blood. That's one extreme. I don't mean to go on that. But on other hand, here I see that you keep repeating liver functions every week to see if its jaundice is coming down, and call the child after follow-up after 1 week, 2 weeks, to see for yourself if the sunlight is doing majority of the work. So that delays the outcome. That worsens the prognosis. So each hospital or a unit that's dealing with this should find out what is necessary as a baseline and send all those blood samples at one go. And after that are the radiological investigations that you would need to assess for finding out what is the structural problem there. So in that I would base an ultrasound scan to begin with, and then follow it up with a functional scan like a HIDA scan. So these would be my preliminary tests. And then depending on what are the outcomes of these test results, then base subsequent tests if necessary.
Yeah, so we would need to do a gamut of investigations right from the beginning. In fact, when patients come to us, the first thing we tell them that there's going to be a battery of tests that we need to do in this child, so don't panic if we remove a lot of blood. Second, it's going to take time because there are certain scans and all that which is going to take 5 days before we can do a scan, so time is also essential. So we need to do a gamut. We cannot do one test after the other. Now this child's hemogram is absolutely fine. Platelet count is normal, so it's not showing that there is pancytopenia or hypersplenism. Neither it's suggestive of a congenital infection. Bilirubin is high, the direct jaundice is high, enzymes are elevated, your prothrombin time is elevated, coagulation profile is high, GGTP is normal, and alkaline phosphatase is also high. So as Dr. Redkar said, the next step that he would like to do is an ultrasound and a HIDA scan. Now the ultrasound in this patient showed hepatosplenomegaly with portal hypertension. There were collaterals present. Gallbladder was not seen on the ultrasound. And HIDA scan, the tracer could not be taken up very well by the liver. So obviously there was no excretion of the tracer in the intestines even after 24 hours. Dr. Redkar, what is the importance of gallbladder not seen? And second, how much weightage would you keep to this HIDA report?
Right. Well, I am more worried about the other part. If gallbladder is not seen, then people come to surgeons anyway because they feel this is biliary atresia and we get the referrals early. But I am worried about the other part where unfortunately gallbladder is seen in some of them. The gallbladder may be cystic and patent and the distal tract may be patent, but this child may have proximal biliary atresia. So if gallbladder is not seen, it's, as I said, it's a good indicator. The referrals are faster. But sometimes gallbladders are seen on the ultrasound. Some of them empty if the distal tract